Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel, and thank you for joining me today. I am so excited and honored to have Robert Aho with me today. A little bit of background on Robert. He experienced a near-death experience during a heart procedure in 2016 and another much smaller near-death experience in 2021. During another heart procedure. In his talks, he explains being immediately integrated into that inexplicable light. Although Robert is a Buddhist and has written 2 books from that perspective, he is sensitive to other spiritual paths, having explored many in great detail. He has frequently spoken in interfaith, Buddhist, and scientific settings, providing clarification that can be readily understood from different perspectives. And I asked Robert on today to talk about his near-death experience because it is one of the most profound that I have ever heard and offers a really important and unique message to this conversation, in my opinion. So thank you so much for joining me, Robert.
Yes, well, thank you for inviting me. I'm very glad to be here. So as you said, in 2016, I had a heart procedure. And one thing I'd like to sort of preface this by, because I have spoken in front of a number of interfaith groups and people with different perspectives, groups of scientists. The experience that I had, I think you can take whatever faith or whatever spiritual path, or even if you're not if you think you're not particularly spiritual, or you're very rational, or something, or I personally, my opinion, everybody is spiritual. It's we all have that driving need for something that we can't quite explain, and if something stands in our way, we get upset or depressed, or it ruins our day. It might be a little thing, and usually that has something to do with how we feel about our own spiritual well-being, and respecting our own spiritual path, and respecting our search for truth, which is what a scientist does. People who are agnostic, or you've got to prove it to them, everything, prove it. And so we need to just keep respecting our own spiritual path and take whatever evidence we can find. And then I think that's how you can take whatever it is that I'm talking about and apply it to whatever point of view you're at. And believe me, there are so many people from so many different backgrounds, different perspectives. One church that I spoke at has people from literally, I can't even count how many. They're an interfaith church, and I've spoken there, and they're very diverse and very diverse backgrounds, and they keep inviting me back. So my near-death experience, the first one, I think you could call it, well, from a Buddhist perspective, and like many people who are listening to this talk today have heard about the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Okay, so if you take that as a reference point, the near-death experience that I had is literally as far as you can possibly go in a near-death experience. So what happened with me is I'm in a hospital room. I'm surrounded by all kinds of people, and there was a chance I could have died right there on the table. It wasn't a super complicated procedure, but it could happen. It happens. And oftentimes people, when they come to again, they're very angry. Because it's very painful, and it really, it's a shock, and it's a kind of a violent experience getting in there with your heart and everything. And so I was okay with that. You know, if I died, I died. I had very much prepared for death. I had spent a number of many years meditating on death, and had, you know, intellectually, I understood, you know, this is your body, and you have a mind, and this mind is really transmigrating, and it's conscious, and we are essentially energy. We're a form of light. Matter is a form of light. I mean, all of this what seems solid is sort of energy in motion. And I understood that, and intellectually understood that. I mean, obviously, we don't, you know, kind of walk around in a daze throughout our lives. We have to function. And but I had received some very profound teachings from some very well-respected Buddhist teachers, and I revered them. I just, you know, I was all in. Now I wasn't a Buddhist from when I was a child. I started life as a Christian, and I was very serious as a Christian. And I think I went as far as I could go, and I needed more, and I became an agnostic for a number of years, and then I became a Buddhist. But now that I'm a Buddhist, I don't reject either being an agnostic or Christian. I realize, oh, that's all part of the same spiritual path. It's the same thing. I needed each of those things at a certain time. Okay, so big, I didn't mean to go off the path there. Okay, so I'm in the hospital, and I'm about to get this procedure, and I waved goodbye. I was like, well, this might be the last thing I see. And boom, I became that amazing light that everybody talks about, that light at the end of the tunnel. And I became that light for an eternity. Just boom. And this person that I had been, no longer existed. I no longer existed. I mean, I guess that's the easiest way to explain it, even though that's not entirely true. I became integrated with that light. The light and me, no difference, exactly the same. And when you are that light, the idea of a self just seems ridiculous. Like, why would I want to be a person? Why would I want to be a being with all that suffering throughout life, all this misery, everything clouded, no awareness of anything? Just these are beings, you know. And so that light, that amazing, and when I say light, I could say God, I could say the source. You know, there's different ways of explaining that. In reality, there's no human explanation whatsoever that can come close to what that life experience really is. Nothing. So it's beyond anything we can imagine. So we put labels on all different things in our spiritual life, but this particular experience, which I would say it was directly experienced. So I becoming that light, it was like it wasn't even like I went anywhere. It was like, boom, I was there. That's it. I'm that light. And that light, uh, it's so intense that a million suns wouldn't be anywhere close to that intense. You know, right all in orbit around the Earth. It would be not even close. Anything you can think of in this life, this human life, is very dull by comparison. Uh, Things that would burn your eyes, like an arc welder or looking at the sun, you know, which you should not do. Those were not even nearly as bright as this. but it was a sense of profound awareness of everything and beyond everything. It was this radiant love and compassion that cannot be defined as just simple love and compassion. It was beyond what we as humans can rationally experience, because it was complete openness. Nothing was hidden anywhere. And the essence of everything was very obvious. So I remained in that timeless condition, what I say is an eternity, because time doesn't exist. That's an illusion that we as human beings create. We need it in order to navigate through the world and, get places on time and, all of that sort of thing. This was beyond what we would call time. It was beyond the fabrication of time. It was beyond physical constraints. So I remained in that state for an eternity. This is something that scientists are incredibly interested in, because this is touching on quantum physics, where, okay, so we have this notion of time, but when you start examining what is time, it falls apart. It doesn't hold together. And so, there's some people speculate that it runs backwards in reality, or that everything is happening all at once. I would say neither one of those things is true, not completely. And also not that it's running in a line either. We are in an eternal now, but we don't realize it. So if we could awaken, we would realize that this now, like this talk this started in the past. That we can't find that anymore. That we can see a recording of it, but we can't actually go there. And we can't see the future either. But we also, being clouded by our own mind, we cannot really see now unless we awaken to that light that I became. So that my first book, Timeless Luminosity, that's what those poems are all about. And that's what I was trying to do, is to write poems that people could awaken. So being there in eternity was very nice. It was very wonderful. Being everything and beyond everything, very, very wonderful. But I started to notice a little dot in the distance, and then colors started to appear, and kind of a dull place. It seemed like it was kind of like in my, I didn't have a body, so I don't know why I would say it was my lower right field of vision, but that's how I remember it. And so I started to notice that, and very slowly, just little by little, I started to remember that I had once been a person. And so I looked at that. No body, I'm looking at something, but I'm paying attention to it. We'll put it that way. And okay, yeah, I sort of remember being a person. I remember a little bit about what my life was about. I started to look at that and see things like that. And that was when I started to have this overwhelming need to go back into my body. And at first, I'm thinking, I'm kind of debating, oh, it was kind of horrible, because I've been having a lot of health issues, and it's been really difficult, and a lot of it has to do with persistent chronic pain that I've been dealing with for decades now. So it wasn't really something that I wanted to do from a sort of a selfish point of view, but from coming out of that light, I knew I had to go there, and I knew that I had more things to do, and I knew that the experience that I was having right then, this whole experience of death, was something I needed to talk about and write about, and help people to understand why it's important to respect your spiritual path and be very compassionate towards yourself, feel strong sense of love for yourself, and have a desire to awaken. Now, there's a term for that in Buddhism that's called bodhicitta. So it's the bodhicitta is a strong, compassionate, loving desire to awaken, and it starts with yourself, and it spreads to all beings. So it's this on a relative reality level, as it from a human perspective, we spread it to all beings. But on an ultimate level, which coming out of the light, that was ultimate bodhicitta, and it cannot be described. So it's pure, intense openness, and it has depth to it that is sometimes hard to really understand as a human. So in meditation, we go back to that over and over again, looking at helping everybody. That's a very common Mahayana teaching, is to help everybody. But even people who are first starting out on the path, before somebody becomes a Buddhist, and I'm not telling anybody to become a Buddhist because that's your decision. I'm not trying to sell I'm not proselytizing or anything, but it is a decision where a person needs to have that type of desire to awaken themselves. They have to want to become part of this amazing awareness that we all have. We've all got that. This is nothing special about what happened to me. This is something that everybody has experienced before. It's not unique. It's part of our condition. Even and okay, so in Western cultures, we get into some debate about rebirth. Do we have multiple lifetimes? From my perspective, from those experiences of death, I could see very clearly that of course we have multiple lifetimes. We have so many lifetimes we can't even see that far back. But we don't have to accept that. We can examine that and keep examining that. We don't have to say that as a belief. But we all have these moments of clarity, little flash of light that it's there, and you understand something, and then it goes away and you can't remember what that was. We all have that, and especially in dreams. We have a flash of light in dreams, and then we can't remember what that was. Well, that was clear awareness. That was our real condition, which is we've never been separate from that. We only think we're separate from that. And so you can make a lot of analogies across many different religious traditions and talk about, are we separate from whatever that incredible wisdom is? And the answer is really that no, we're not separate from that. That is who we really are. And that's why we have this spiritual need and desire to return to that. So when I entered that dull area, which I call it dull because having been in that very bright condition, it's dull by comparison. But in reality, compared to the earth, it's still brighter than anything we've seen. It's just all these bright colors and all these incredible swirling vibrations and like bubbles of light and all sorts of incredible things, and a lot of sound and a lot of and I don't know, how do you have sound when you don't have ears? I didn't have a body yet. I was still in this energetic condition, but it was part of this well, it was being aware of our energetic condition is what it is. In Buddhism, that's called Sambhogakaya. So it's something that is not readily perceivable to most human beings. You have to really start to awaken before you start to notice that. You know, you might have some traditions might say they can see the auras of people, or colors look so vibrant, all of a sudden they look vibrant. So you're starting to perceive the Sambhogakaya dimension. And so I spent, I decided that yes, I absolutely need to return to this body, even though from a personal basis it was not a good thing. It was a very painful thing to do. And so I made that effort. I started off with saying mantras, many mantras that I haven't even learned in this lifetime, but I realized, oh, in past lifetimes I had learned some mantras. And so I was saying these mantras, and then there's these mudras. You might have seen Tibetan lamas do this sort of thing, you know, and there all sorts of different hand gestures. That has a spiritual connection. I don't use a lot of mantra or a lot of mudras when I do my meditation practice, but I did coming back, and I was so determined that I spent 100 years. It wasn't exactly, I mean, I say it's 100 years because it was like a long lifetime. It was twice as long as my current lifetime. It felt something like that. And that's all I did. I didn't have a body, so I didn't need to eat. I didn't need to go to work. I didn't need to do anything other than exist in that energetic dimension. I could have stayed there. I could have stayed in the light, as far as in the what we call the Dharmakaya light. That's the term used in Buddhism. But or the source, I could have stayed in the source. The only reason I could have stayed there, though, I really need to caution people in case they're listening to this and thinking, oh, they'd like to die. No. You're here because you need to awaken. You can't stay there unless you awaken. You have to awaken. And so when I was there, because I was there the way I was there, I awakened in that condition. So when I'm coming back into my body, I needed to fabricate somebody that was not awakened, somebody that I had been before, somebody that wouldn't freak everybody out. Because actually coming from that condition, you can quite literally do anything. You have no limitations whatsoever. But to come back into my body, I had to remember a whole lifetime worth of thoughts, trauma, the pain that I'd experienced. I had the way I spoke. You know, it's important to speak the way you speak, because you speak in a way that's near the people who you live with. So I live in northern Minnesota. I can't hear my accent, but I know I have one. But it's important. These are all things that I had to fabricate about myself. And I say fabricate, meaning that I'm like assembling myself. I'm a construction project. Now, I make a living as an architect, but so maybe that analogy makes sense. But also from a Buddhist perspective, that's what we do when we create self. We create self from identities. We have an ego, all this stuff that puts our self into this nice, neat package so that we can look presentable to people. You know, it's if I was completely not fabricated, I would look a lot crazier than I look. And believe me, I look plenty crazy to some people. So it's a balancing act, you know. But this fabrication of self was done purposefully from that light of awareness, from the source. And I was doing it because I needed to be able to speak from the perspective of this person, or else it wouldn't have any relevance. I would be some crazy rambling person on the street and nobody would listen to me. So 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 I had to do it this way. I had to come back into this body. I had to, go back to making a living the way I was making a living. I had to sort of dress the way I dress and live the way I live. And so I came here. And so 100 years. So difference of time. Time is completely relative and it doesn't exist. But in the Sambhogakaya, it was first it was an eternity in the Dharmakaya, the light. It was 100 years in the Sambhogakaya, or the energetic dimension. And then I saw my body in the physical dimension, and I could hear noises. Even though I wasn't in my body, I could hear these sounds. I could hear people talking. I could sense what was going on. I could sense their thoughts, and they were worried about me, and there were all these things happening that they were trying to make sure I was okay. People in the waiting room waiting for me. My loved ones were right there at the hospital. And so I was getting close to my body, and I heard the nurses talking, and they had, oh, he's moving. And what's one of the nurses said, well, what's he doing? And so my hands started moving. I was still doing these mudras. And I was still chanting a little bit. Yeah, he could hear me. And another nurse said, well, he must be a Buddhist or something. And right then, boom, I popped into my body and my eyes opened up. I said, you could be right. And everybody just laughed and laughed and laughed. That was so funny. And, so the whole, and I kind of sat up a little bit and looked around, and there were people outside the room, people right in the room. The door was open because there were people coming and going. And there was a desk out there, and everybody heard me say that, and they were laughing. I don't think this is very common for somebody to make a joke like that when you come out of a heart procedure. And I saw my doctor, my cardiologist, and I said, could we do that again? And he said, no way, we're never doing this again with you. And he was like the guy from Airplane. He had sweat coming down his face. And he was really nervous. I could tell he thought he had lost a patient. And so, I mean, just all of a sudden, I'm back in my body. And everything kind of calmed down, and I turned to the nurse and I said, I'm pretty sure that I died. How long was I gone? And she said, well, let's look at your chart. I'll show you. And so the what's it called, the EKG tracing was right there. And she said, well, look, you flatlined. This is all this time, and then your heart moved just a little bit here, and then it flatlined and moved a little bit more. And she said, I was only about 5 minutes. So I had flatlined for about 5 minutes. And I said, let's see. Yeah, it seemed a lot longer than that. I was really surprised. So, I didn't talk about it at all to anybody for a little while. I mean, maybe a little hint here or there. I'm a little bit like an open book, so I don't keep things secret very well. I let people know what I'm thinking. So there I was back.
Thank you so much for sharing that story, Robert. And I have to say, I've really appreciated hearing your perspective as a Buddhist, because so many near-death experience accounts that I have heard come maybe from more of a Christian or Hindu perspective. So I really, really enjoyed hearing what you shared. And I also love your open-mindedness towards religion as well. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions about your experience?
Oh, absolutely. Go ahead.
One thing I'd love to start with is that you've done some artwork and you sent me a picture of that so I can put it right up on the screen.
Oh,
But
yeah.
yeah, and I see it's back there as well.
I dug it out just for this talk.
Wonderful. So could you
Yeah.
explain what's in there?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so with my experience, as I said, I was instantly the light. And I wanted to paint this experience. It was really hard to do. I could have just done a white canvas and been done with it, because that was so much more than any of the rest of the experience. It was, when you're someplace for an eternity, that's a big deal.
Mhm.
So I was in the brightest part of this, what we might call it the end of the tunnel, but I didn't go down a tunnel. I was just instantly there. And so I started to notice, sort of in this area first, all these colors and rays of light, and mostly it was a lot of swirling and vibrating, like really great storms. And it was actually, at first started, it was very small. And I started to notice, all sorts of different types of colors. And I think this blue dot here, I started to think, I thought I saw it was actually a really large area, but not in this field. It was really small, kind of a heaven. And so I sort of did a little dot there, and other little dots here and there that had some kind of significance. And I started to sense that there's life everywhere, not just in our universe, but multi-universes, the parallel universes, and places that are beyond any sort of universe. So like this little heaven here would be beyond any universe. This is sort of in that edge of that energetic field between the light and the energetic field. And then sort of like way down here, a little black dot right there, I don't know, probably doesn't show up very well. That's our universe. The dullest part of this field is our universe. And so I started to notice this, I was still in the bright light, and I started to notice the colors and the swirling and the vibrating and all of this. Now, this Dharmakaya light, the source, is it's so vast that there's literally no end to it. It's beyond belief. So, how do you paint that? The colors and all of that, that's where consciousness arises. So I didn't really have what we would call consciousness when I was in this white light condition. I was fully aware, but I would say not the same as consciousness, because consciousness has more of a relevancy to our own spiritual patterns, because this is like being a drop in a great ocean. This is like, okay, well, now we've got a cup of water, so it's much smaller, almost imperceptible from the light. And then the universe, you've probably seen pictures of the universe that they explain how small our own Earth is compared to the rest of the universe. Our own galaxy is small compared to the rest of the universe. Well, that universe that we think is so large from our human perspective is just a little dot in this field, just a little tiny dot, very dull, very dark. It's part of of this dense realm. We're in a realm where light can become dense, and that's what matter is. So so that's what I did. I mean, I was a little bit inspired by Van Gogh. You can probably see that, but that was really what I needed in order to paint it, is to have that sort of vibration in that field. I think Van Gogh, people thought he was crazy, but I think he was really seeing this type of thing. He could see it, and I think that's why his paintings were the way they were. So, I kind of used him as an inspiration there. And then, all the multi-universes also in a dense realm, and they kind of spread out because they're not all completely dense light either. So, so that's what that's all about. So
I have to say, I'm really happy that you painted that, because we haven't talked about this, but I actually have some pre-birth memories. I've shared what I can of those, the things that I've come to have some type of understanding. But I've always said there's so much more that I can't explain it, because I don't even understand what it is.
mhm.
But that painting that you have there with those colors and the shapes and the little sphere that you said might have been a heaven-like realm is exactly the type of thing that I remember. And
Mhm.
so I'm glad, I'm really glad that you painted that and explained it, because it sort of gives me a framework to have a better understanding.
Well, thank you. That's very nice to hear. I'm glad that's what how you benefited from that.
Mm,
It's sort of like, you know, how when we dream and things make sense to us in a dream, and we
yeah.
wake up and it's like you can't even explain it. What was that? And
Yeah.
it wasn't logical at all. It wasn't something we would do in our daily life. Well, this whole death experience is kind of the same way, but the reason that we experience this is because we're completely open to that condition. It's direct experience. So then we often forget these really important messages, these really important experiences. We forget them because it doesn't make sense to us in our daily life. So we cast it aside. We think it's not important, when in reality, it's the most important thing we can learn is what is our real condition?
Mhm.
What's going on here? And it's not so easy to do. I think it's impossible to do intellectually. To really understand what's going on here, we have to experience it directly. So that requires looking inwardly. That requires looking at uh, looking at our mind, looking at our real condition, which we would say is the nature of mind, getting to know that and cultivating that in our life. So there's so many things that we can do to cultivate this compassion in our life. I mean, a really simple thing to do is just to be a generous person, just be kind. Uh, Practicing kindness starts to open us up. It starts to we start to see how wonderful everyone is. We start to see that, oh, this world is a lot more beautiful than I thought it was. And you really start to notice little things. You can be kind, but then you might start going on real slow walks and looking at flowers, looking at insects, just noticing how beautiful things are. And those are, whether you call it meditation or not, you're you are starting to be aware. You're starting to be present. So when we can start to learn about what's going on, we we are tapping into that eternal wisdom that we were all born with, but we forgot. We just forgot about it. That's why we keep getting reborn. So these past life memories are really pretty incredible. My second book, The Frog, I don't know if I sent you a picture of that or not, but this is my second book. This is many past lifetimes and spiritual life across many lifetimes. And what I do say in there is that it's not that important to remember our past lifetimes, but it's important to remember lessons we should have learned in past lifetimes. So we don't need to know where that came from, but we need to know that there's a lesson here that we need to pay attention to. And if we can awaken, we slowly, or maybe, instantaneously, we all have the capacity to awaken in any instant. This is not something that's forbidden. It's not hidden from anybody. It's not secret. It's who we really are. So we can do that anytime we want, but we have to really want that, because otherwise we go right back to our confusing life and all the problems it generates and all the stress and confusion. And that's, for some reason we're attached to that. We can't let it go. And if we don't let it go, well, it will keep going on forever. We're in an eternal life right now. it's and the more you examine what that is, the more you realize that, it's maybe not as great as we think it is. That we think it could, really. It's not all it's cut out to be. I should make that phrase. That does not mean, though, that a person should kill themselves, because when a person does that, their problems will multiply, and you will be reborn. You won't be able to remain in the light. You will have the additional problems. These are things that we do to ourselves. This is why we have to have compassion to ourselves. And instead of trying to just end it abruptly, we need to look at our life and say, okay, if I awaken, then it's not doing harm. Now, one of the things we're here to learn is not doing harm to ourselves and others. And I think I've made this comment many times. I don't know if I've done it in an interview before, but I look at the world like it's a big insane asylum. I look at the world like, okay, people, why are you always making things worse for yourselves rather than better? Because we have the ability to make everything wonderful. We have that ability. But so often people they get very attached to their own negativity and self-destructive behaviors, and it's not it leads nowhere. It just leads nowhere. And they think a person needs to recognize what they're doing to themselves before they can start to really have that drive to awaken, to make their life better, to make other people's lives better. And that's at the core of what we are, of who we are. But we forget that. It's like waking from a dream every day. We forget what that dream was really about. Well, that's what this dream is all about. One of my my root teacher in Buddhism, it's a very important teacher. His name was Namkai Narbu. He passed away a couple of years ago. But he said that life is like a big dream with a lot of little dreams inside of it. So he always went back to that notion that this isn't really real like we think it is. I mean, it's real in our mind, but it's not real in the sense that anything can ever be located. It's just like a dream. When you wake up, you realize that, well, there was nothing to that. Why did I think it was such a big deal? If you have a nightmare, you might think, oh, that was terrible. See some terrible things happen. But then you wake up and realize, well, that wasn't really happening, but in my mind it was happening. So that's one of the things that I became aware of in this experience, both upon coming back, but in that the being in that light, I understood the essence of everything, our life, all this material stuff. I saw the essence of that, and it's not real. It's something we think is real, and we cling to this notion that because our ego tries to make sense of everything, and so we defend that. We're always looking for, okay, that made sense, and I'm gonna defend that idea to my death. And well, okay, but we could probably dismiss it at some point. If we examined any idea long enough, we could dismiss it. There's any philosophy can ultimately crumble, because it's not anything that the human mind can imagine is it's not ultimate reality, it's relative reality. It's our ideas and beliefs from a certain point of view. So that's why we when we look at what's happening, when we continually, if we meditate, we go back to looking inwardly, everything becomes revealed through that introspection. but you can't really explain what it is. So many religions, Buddhism, for instance, will say, that Buddha Shakyamuni, when he awakened, he the first thing he thought was, well, nobody will ever believe this. So he wasn't going to teach anybody. But then people started poking at him. He wanted them to teach. And so there's debate about whether he taught ultimate reality. I would say no, he didn't teach anything ultimate. He taught a path for attaining this awareness. So we could say the same thing about Christ, that he taught about love and compassion, or Yeshua was his real name, taught about love and compassion. Well, that's a path. That's a path, and it doesn't become ultimate until you attain that bright awareness. So he taught the same thing that Buddha taught. It's just in a different way, from a different perspective. And you see this with any of the great religions around the world. There's somebody who had seen something, some wisdom that they couldn't describe, but they helped people to get there. So this is amazing. I mean, this is really amazing that all these different people, great masters throughout time, they were talking about the same thing, even though it doesn't sound the same, and there's all kinds of collisions between different belief sets. And you see that within Christianity, you see that within Buddhism. Every belief set, they argue and bicker about the little fine points, and they're missing the big picture, this open, luminous, timeless state. That's the big picture. So the little details, that's just an argument about something that's might be good for you, but that doesn't mean it's good for somebody else. It's just how you choose to walk on a spiritual path. And that's why I keep saying it's important. It's very important to respect your own spiritual path and strive to get better at it until you awaken. When you awaken, there's nothing else you can do. So I think that's important.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. How are you doing on time?
I'm fine. I have nothing else scheduled today.
Okay, do you mind if I ask you just a couple more questions?
Sure.